The night was quiet. Too quiet. In the frozen wilderness of northern Canada, where endless snow stretches farther than the eye can see, there once stood a small settlement beside the silent waters of Anjikuni Lake. It was not a large village. Only around 100 people lived there, belonging to an Inuit community that had survived in this harsh environment for generations. For them, life followed a simple rhythm: hunting, fishing, cooking beside warm fires, and preparing for the long Arctic winters. But in November 1930, something happened in that village that would become one of the strangest mysteries in history. A hunter arrived at the settlement expecting warmth, food, and friendly faces. Instead, he walked into a ghost town. Fires were still burning, food was left on the stove, clothes were half sewn, dogs were tied to posts, but every single person had vanished. No bodies, no footprints, no sign of struggle. It was as if the entire village had simply disappeared into thin air. Even today, nearly a century later, the mystery of Anjikuni Lake continues to disturb historians, investigators, and curious minds around the world. What happened that night? Did the villagers flee from something terrifying? Were they taken by force? Or did something far stranger happen in the frozen silence of the Arctic? To understand how this chilling mystery began, we must first travel back to the remote northern lands, where survival itself was a daily battle. Long before the mystery shocked the country, the region around Anjikuni Lake was known as one of the most isolated places in Canada. This was not a place where cities existed or roads connected communities. Vast icy plains stretched across thousands of kilometers, broken only by frozen lakes, rocky hills, and small camps where Inuit families lived. Among them were Inuit communities who had learned to survive in this unforgiving land for centuries. Their lives depended on the animals of the Arctic: fish from the lakes, caribou roaming the tundra, seals and other wildlife that provided food, clothing, and tools. Winters were brutal. Temperatures could drop far below freezing, and darkness could last for weeks. But these communities had adapted to the environment in ways outsiders could hardly imagine. Small villages were built near lakes because water meant fish, and fish meant survival. One such village stood quietly beside Anjikuni Lake. It was a peaceful settlement where families lived in simple shelters and tents. Hunters left early in the morning, returning with fish or game. Women prepared food, repaired clothing, and cared for children. Travelers who passed through often spoke about the kindness of the villagers. Hunters from other areas sometimes visited the settlement to rest for the night, share food, and warm themselves beside the fires. One of those hunters was a man named Joe LaBelle. LaBelle was familiar with the region. He had traveled through the northern wilderness many times and knew that the village near Anjikuni Lake was a reliable place to stop during long hunting trips. Whenever he arrived, he was welcomed: warm food, friendly conversation, and a safe place to sleep. But one freezing evening in November 1930, LaBelle's journey would lead him into something he could never have imagined. The day had been long and exhausting. LaBelle had been hunting across the snowy wilderness for hours, tracking animals through the forest and along the lake's frozen edges. By the time he packed his equipment and started heading back, darkness had already begun to fall. The Arctic night comes quickly. Within minutes, the sky had turned black, and the icy wind began cutting through the trees. LaBelle knew he could not continue traveling all night, so he made a decision. He would spend the night at the Inuit village beside Anjikuni Lake, just as he had done before. As he walked through the snow, the moonlight reflected across the frozen landscape, making everything glow in pale silver. The air was still, and the only sound he could hear was the crunch of snow beneath his boots. Usually, as travelers approached the village, they could hear life: dogs barking, voices talking, children laughing. But that night there was nothing. No voices, no movement, only silence. At first, LaBelle assumed the villagers had already gone to sleep. Still, something felt strange. When he reached the edge of the settlement, he noticed smoke rising from some of the huts. That meant fires were still burning. Someone had to be there. Relieved, he stepped closer. But as he walked through the village, confusion slowly turned into fear. The first hut he entered was empty. No people, no movement, only a fire still glowing in the corner. He checked another shelter. Empty again. Then another. Still no one. Soon LaBelle began rushing from hut to hut, calling out for anyone who might hear him. But there was no response. The entire village was deserted. Yet everything inside told a different story. Cooking pots were still sitting over the fire. Some food had burned completely, as if it had been left unattended for hours. In one shelter, clothing was spread across the floor with sewing needles still threaded, as though someone had been working and suddenly stopped.
It looked as if the villagers had been in the middle of their daily routines when something interrupted them. Something sudden, something urgent. But here's where the mystery became even more disturbing. Outside the huts, Labelle discovered the village dogs. They were tied to posts, and many of them had died from hunger. That meant they had been left alone for days. No one had returned to feed them. By this point, Labelle was deeply shaken. He began searching the entire settlement again, hoping he had somehow missed the villagers. But the result was always the same: empty huts, cold silence, and the feeling that something terrible had happened here.
Terrified, Labelle decided he could not stay there alone. He gathered his belongings and rushed to the nearest telegraph station, where he reported the bizarre discovery. Soon, the news reached the authorities. Investigators from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police were sent to the remote region to investigate the disappearance. When they arrived at the village near Anjikuni Lake, they expected to find evidence of violence or an attack, but the scene only deepened the mystery. There were no signs of struggle, no broken tools, no scattered belongings, no blood. And perhaps the strangest discovery of all was the snow. The entire area around the village was covered in thick snow, but investigators found almost no footprints, no tracks leading away from the settlement, no signs that a large group of people had traveled across the frozen landscape. It was as if the villagers had vanished without leaving a trace. Some investigators wondered if the villagers had fled because of a sudden danger, but if that were true, why leave behind food, tools, clothing, and their dogs? Others believed the story had been exaggerated. Still, the strange details continued to fuel speculation. Years passed, and the case slowly faded from headlines, but the mystery refused to disappear. In 1984, writers Roger Bourdaise and Nigel Blundell brought the story back into public attention. They suggested a far more unusual possibility. According to stories told by hunters in the region, strange lights had sometimes been seen flying over the frozen skies near Anjikuni Lake, bright objects moving silently through the night. The writers proposed a shocking theory. What if something not from Earth had visited the village? What if the villagers had been taken by mysterious flying objects? The idea spread quickly and captured the imagination of many people. But there was one problem. There was no real evidence. No photographs, no physical proof. Most historians and researchers rejected the alien explanation. Still, the questions remained. If aliens were not responsible, then what happened? Some believe the story itself may have been exaggerated over time. Others think the villagers may have quietly moved to another location, something Inuit communities sometimes did when resources became scarce. But critics argue that such a move would leave tracks, tools being carried away, and clear signs of relocation. None were found. Another theory suggests the hunter story may not have been completely accurate. Records from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police later indicated they had no official investigation report confirming the disappearance. That has led some researchers to believe the mystery might have grown through rumors and retellings. Yet the legend refuses to fade. Even today, the story of the vanished village near Anjikuni Lake continues to appear in books, documentaries, and discussions about unexplained events. Because deep down, people are fascinated by mysteries that have no clear answers. And this story touches something primal: the fear of entering a place where life once existed and suddenly finding nothing but silence. Imagine arriving in a village where fires are still warm, where tools lie unfinished, where food sits abandoned, but not a single person remains. It creates a haunting image that stays with you. Whether the story is a misunderstood event, an exaggerated tale, or something truly unexplained, the mystery has become part of northern folklore. The frozen lands of Nunavut still hold countless secrets hidden beneath ice and snow. And somewhere in those vast, silent landscapes, the truth behind the legend may still be waiting. Perhaps one day historians will uncover new evidence that finally explains what happened beside Anjikuni Lake. Or perhaps the mystery will remain unsolved forever, a story passed from generation to generation, a reminder that even in the modern world, there are still moments in history where reality and mystery blur together. And sometimes, the most chilling stories are not the ones with answers, but the ones where an entire village simply disappears overnight.